The Galactic Military Academy's main auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species filed into their designated sections. Admiral Zexkar, a tall, graceful Veltharian with silver skin that shimmered under the artificial lights, stood at the central podium adjusting his ceremonial uniform. His forearms moved in practiced coordination as he reviewed his notes one final time. Today marked the beginning of the most ambitious military exercise in galactic history. Attention, cadets. His voice resonated through the translation devices worn by every student. Today, you begin the Omega Protocol simulation, a comprehensive war game that has taken our finest strategic minds 3 years to develop. In the far corner of the auditorium, 12 human cadets sat together, looking distinctly out of place among their alien classmates. The humans had only recently been admitted to the Academy after their species' controversial entry into the Galactic Federation. Most other species viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Earth was classified as a Class 1-2 death world, a designation reserved for planets so hostile that merely surviving childhood was considered a military achievement by galactic standards. The human cadets ranged from various Earth nations and backgrounds. Sarah Chen from the former Pacific Alliance wore her dark hair in a regulation bun, her eyes scanning the room with tactical awareness. Marcus Webb from the European Federation cracked his knuckles unconsciously, a habit that made nearby Zephyrian students flinch at the bone-popping sounds. Keiko Tanaka from the Asian Cooperative sat perfectly still, her meditation training evident in her controlled breathing. Each human carried themselves with a quiet confidence that unnerved their alien peers. Admiral Zexkar continued his briefing. The simulation encompasses 17 star systems, each with unique strategic challenges. Your objective is simple: achieve total victory through military conquest, diplomatic annexation, or economic domination. Our projections indicate this exercise will require 8 to 12 years to complete, allowing you to experience the full complexity of galactic warfare. A ripple of excitement passed through the crowd. 8 years represented roughly equivalent time periods for most species' academic cycles, though for humans it was nearly half their brief lifespans. The Admiral gestured toward the massive holographic display that materialized above the auditorium, showing a 3-dimensional map of the simulated galaxy sector. Each species will command forces matching their biological and cultural strengths. Aquatic species will excel in water world scenarios. Energy-based beings will dominate plasma-rich environments. The crystalline Jektar will find advantages in mineral-heavy systems. His 4 eyes swept across the assembled students. Every species has been given equal opportunities for success. Sarah leaned over to whisper to Marcus. Equal opportunities, but not equal challenges. She had studied the briefing materials extensively and noticed something the Admiral hadn't mentioned. While each species received advantages in specific environments, the simulation included numerous neutral systems that didn't favor any particular biological adaptation. The briefing continued with technical specifications. Each team would control virtual fleets, armies, and civilian populations. The simulation's advanced AI would generate realistic responses to every decision, creating consequences that could ripple across years of game time. Economic choices made in Year 1 could determine industrial capacity in Year 5. Diplomatic relationships established early could create alliances or enmities lasting decades. The simulation begins in 1 hour, Admiral Zexkar announced. Use this time to organize your teams and develop preliminary strategies. Remember, this exercise will test not just your tactical knowledge, but your patience, long-term planning abilities, and capacity to adapt to changing circumstances over extended periods. As species groups dispersed to their preparation areas, the humans gathered in a small briefing room assigned to them. The space felt cramped after the vast auditorium, but it provided privacy for their planning session. Marcus spread holographic tactical displays across the central table, while Sarah began analyzing the initial resource distributions. Look at this, Keiko pointed to the galactic map. We start with 3 systems: 1 agricultural world, 1 mining colony, and 1 research station. Standard distribution pattern. She paused, studying the neighboring territories. But our positioning is interesting. We're surrounded by 4 different species, each with overlapping territorial claims. The other human cadets leaned in to examine the strategic situation. James Crawford from the African Union traced supply lines with his finger. The simulation assumes we'll follow standard galactic doctrine. Establish secure borders, build up slowly, avoid early conflicts. He grinned. But we're not standard galactic species, are we? Ana Rodriguez from the South American Federation laughed quietly. They've designed this whole exercise around species that evolved cooperation and long-term thinking. Look at the victory conditions again. She highlighted sections of the rules. Economic victory requires maintaining positive trade relationships with at least 60% of galactic powers for 5 consecutive years. Diplomatic victory needs formal alliance treaties covering 40 systems. And military victory, added David Kim from the North American Republic, requires controlling 75% of all systems while maintaining stability ratings above acceptable thresholds. He shook his head. They've created a system that rewards cautious, methodical expansion over aggressive action. Sarah stood up, pacing the small room's perimeter. But here's what they didn't consider. Human history isn't built on cautious expansion. We're blitzkrieg specialists, lightning warfare. We don't think in terms of decades-long campaigns. She turned to face her teammates. What if we approach this simulation like humans instead of trying to act like galactic citizens? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The other species expected a long, methodical game of strategic patience. They would spend months, maybe years, carefully building up their forces and establishing diplomatic relationships. Meanwhile, the humans could potentially end the entire exercise before anyone realized what was happening. Marcus pulled up detailed system specifications. The simulation processes decisions in real time, but most species will probably take days or weeks between major strategic moves. That's their normal decision-making speed. He highlighted response time averages. Humans think and act faster than almost any other known species. While they're still forming committees to discuss their opening moves, we could have already conquered half the galaxy. But is it possible? Asked Elena Volkov from the Russian Federation. The simulation was designed by the galaxy's best strategic minds. They must have considered rapid expansion scenarios. Keiko had been quietly reviewing the technical documentation. Actually, I think they dismissed rapid expansion as impossible. Look at these logistical constraints. She displayed supply line calculations and maintenance requirements. The simulation assumes commanders need time to consolidate each conquest before moving to the next target. But these calculations are based on non-human psychology. The other human species shared certain characteristics that made extended warfare extremely difficult for them. Most galactic races experienced significant stress from conflict, requiring rest periods between engagements. Their decision-making processes involved complex social hierarchies that slowed response times. Many species had biological limitations that prevented sustained aggressive action. Humans, however, had evolved on a world where constant conflict was the norm. Their species had survived ice ages, predator attacks, natural disasters, and warfare against their own kind. They possessed an almost unique ability to maintain high-stress operations for extended periods while making rapid strategic decisions under pressure. So here's the question, Sarah said, returning to the tactical display. Do we play their game their way and spend the next 8 years in this simulation? Or do we show them what Deathworlder tactics really look like? The vote was unanimous. As the preparation hour concluded and teams returned to the main simulation chamber, the human cadets had finalized a strategy that would have horrified their instructors if they had understood it. While other species prepared for a lengthy campaign of careful maneuvering and gradual expansion, the humans were planning something unprecedented in galactic military history. The simulation chamber itself was a marvel of technology. Holographic displays surrounded each team's command station, providing real-time updates on fleet movements, resource production, and diplomatic communications. The advanced AI governing the exercise could process thousands of simultaneous decisions and generate realistic consequences for every action. Admiral Zexkar's voice echoed through the chamber. Simulation begins, now. Across the room, other species immediately began their expected routines. The Zephyrians convened a council meeting to discuss long-term strategic goals. The crystalline Jektar initiated their consensus-building protocols. The aquatic Mordesh started analyzing water-world opportunities in their sector. The humans, meanwhile, launched their opening assault before most other teams had finished reading their initial status reports. Within the first 10 minutes of the simulation, the human team had already initiated what they privately called Operation Thunderstrike. While other species were still assessing their initial resource allocations and territorial positions, the humans had mobilized their entire starting fleet and launched simultaneous attacks on 3 neighboring systems. Sarah commanded the Northern Assault Group targeting a Zephyrian mining colony. The bird-like aliens had established a small defensive fleet, but their protocols required extensive communication with their homeworld before engaging in combat. By the time they received authorization to defend themselves, Sarah's forces had already overwhelmed their orbital installations and begun landing ground troops. Marcus led the eastern offensive against a Veltharian research outpost. The silver-skinned aliens prided themselves on tactical sophistication, but their four-armed coordination gave them an advantage in complex operations, not rapid response. Marcus exploited this by using crude but effective frontal assaults that the Veltharian AI couldn't predict, because no civilized species fought that way. Meanwhile, Kiko spearheaded the southern campaign against a Jektar crystal farming operation. The crystalline beings communicated through harmonic resonances that required consensus before major decisions. Their collective decision-making process, while preventing costly mistakes, also meant they needed nearly an hour to agree on defensive strategies. Keiko's forces had completed their conquest and moved on to secondary targets before the Jektar even finished their first strategy meeting. The speed of human expansion created cascading effects throughout the simulation that the designers had never anticipated. The AI system struggled to process the rapid succession of territorial changes, supply line rerouting, and diplomatic upheavals. Within 30 minutes, the humans controlled 9 systems instead of their starting 3. Status report. Sarah called out, coordinating overall strategy while simultaneously managing her expanded territory. Eastern sector secure, Marcus reported. I've captured 2 research stations and a manufacturing hub. The Veltharians keep sending diplomatic protests, but their formal complaint process takes 6 hours minimum. Southern expansion proceeding ahead of schedule, Keiko added. The Jektar finally agreed to mobilize their defense fleet, but I've already moved past their original positions. They're essentially trying to defend systems I conquered 20 minutes ago. James had been managing the logistics network that supplied their rapid expansion. Resource flow is holding steady. We're operating on captured supplies and infrastructure. The original simulation assumption was that conquering forces would need months to integrate new systems, but we're just stripping them for immediate military resources. The humans had discovered a critical flaw in the simulation's design. The exercise had been calibrated for species that conquered territory intending to hold and develop it long-term. The AI calculated resource integration, population management, and infrastructure development based on these assumptions. But the humans weren't trying to build an empire. They were trying to win a war game in the fastest possible time. Instead of establishing administrative systems in captured territories, they simply extracted everything useful for immediate military purposes. Civilian populations were largely ignored rather than governed. Industrial facilities were retooled for weapons production rather than economic development. The approach was completely unsustainable in the long term. But in a short-term war game, it provided overwhelming advantages. Admiral Zexkar watched the displays with growing bewilderment. His forearms gestured frantically as he consulted with other instructors. This can't be right, he muttered to Professor Veltara, the simulation's chief designer. The humans show controlling 12 systems after 40 minutes. That's impossible according to our projections. Professor Veltara, an elderly Mordesh whose aquatic species had contributed the simulation's diplomatic complexity algorithms, checked the data streams multiple times. The AI confirms all actions are within legal parameters. The humans haven't violated any rules or exploited programming errors. They're just playing differently than anticipated. By the 45-minute mark, other species finally began responding to the human expansion. The problem was that their responses followed traditional galactic military doctrine, which emphasized careful planning and measured responses. The Zephyrians convened an emergency council to discuss the unprecedented aggression. The Veltharians initiated diplomatic protocols to form a defensive alliance. The Jektar began the complex process of achieving consensus for a counteroffensive. All of these responses would have been effective in a normal, multi-year conflict. But they required time to implement, and time was exactly what the humans refused to provide. Ana Rodriguez had been monitoring enemy communications and strategic preparations. The Zephyrians are planning a coordinated strike in 3 hours, she reported. They want to gather forces from 4 different allied species for a major offensive. David Kim laughed. 3 hours? We'll own half the galaxy by then. The humans had divided their forces into rapid strike teams that could capture and move on from systems faster than enemies could organize responses. While other species spent hours planning each attack, the humans launched dozens of simultaneous assaults using whatever forces were locally available. Their tactics were often crude and wasteful, but their speed more than compensated for lack of sophistication. Elena had been analyzing the overall strategic situation. "We're approaching a critical threshold," she announced. "If we can capture 6 more systems in the next 10 minutes, we'll control enough territory to trigger the economic victory condition. The simulation calculates our resource base as representing 78% of total galactic production." "How is that possible?" asked Marcus. "We've only captured about 20 systems out of hundreds." "Resource concentration," Keiko explained, reviewing the economic data. The simulation designers placed the most valuable mining, manufacturing, and research facilities in systems they assumed would remain stable throughout the exercise. They never considered that one faction might capture all the critical infrastructure in the first hour. The humans had inadvertently identified another design flaw. In a real galaxy, critical resources would be more evenly distributed and heavily defended. But in the simulation, the designers had clustered valuable assets in specific locations to create interesting strategic choices over the course of several years. They expected teams to gradually compete for these prizes through complex campaigns involving alliances, trade agreements, and military buildups. Instead, the humans had simply conquered everything important before anyone else realized it was under threat. Sarah made a command decision. "All teams, initiate Operation Knockout. We're going for economic victory in the next 15 minutes." The final phase of human expansion was even more aggressive than their opening moves. They abandoned all pretense of sustainable conquest and focused entirely on capturing key economic targets. Mining worlds were stripped of equipment and populations relocated to support military operations. Research stations had their databanks downloaded and their personnel reassigned to weapons development. Manufacturing centers were converted entirely to military production. The approach horrified observers who understood the long-term consequences. But within the context of a short-term simulation, it was devastatingly effective. The humans achieved resource dominance faster than the AI could calculate environmental or social stability consequences. Other species finally began to grasp the scale of what was happening. Emergency alliance meetings were called. Military mobilizations were authorized. Diplomatic protests were filed. But all of these responses followed standard procedures that required hours or days to implement. Professor Veltara stared at her monitoring displays in disbelief. "They're going to achieve economic victory," she whispered to Admiral Zexkar. "The simulation calculates human resource control at 87% and climbing." "That's impossible," the Admiral replied. "Economic victory requires sustained control with stability ratings above minimum thresholds. Surely their rapid expansion has created massive instability." "That's just it," the professor said, checking stability calculations. "They're not trying to maintain stability. They're extracting resources faster than instability can develop. The simulation assumes conquerors want to hold territory permanently, so it calculates long-term consequences. But, if someone only needs to hold territory for an hour, the realization struck both instructors simultaneously. The humans weren't playing a galactic conquest simulation. They were playing a speed run. At the 57-minute mark, alarms began sounding throughout the simulation chamber. The AI system had detected an anomaly that threatened the integrity of the entire exercise. Human resource control had reached 91%, triggering automatic victory conditions that the designers had assumed would never activate in less than several years. Admiral Zexi's car rushed between monitoring stations, his forearms working frantically to understand what was happening. The holographic displays showed a galaxy that had been completely transformed in under an hour. Red indicators marked human-controlled systems, spreading like wildfire across previously stable territories. Blue diplomatic zones had collapsed into military occupation areas. Green economic partnerships had been replaced by resource extraction operations. "Shut down the simulation," he ordered Professor Veltara. "Something has gone wrong with the AI calculations." "I can't," she replied, her aquatic features showing distress patterns that made her skin shimmer with worried colors. The AI is functioning perfectly. It's processing human actions exactly as programmed. The problem isn't the simulation. It's that the humans are playing a completely different game than we designed. In the human command area, controlled chaos reigned as 12 cadets managed an empire that spanned most of the simulated galaxy. They had abandoned traditional command structures in favor of rapid decision-making protocols that prioritized speed over hierarchy. Sarah coordinated overall strategy while simultaneously managing 3 active conquest campaigns. Marcus ran logistics for 17 different supply chains while directing fleet movements. Each human multitasked at levels that would have overwhelmed most other species. Final phase initiation, Sarah announced. We need 3 more critical systems for complete economic victory. Keiko, take the Zephyrian Industrial Complex in Sector 7. David, assault the Mordesh Research Installation in Sector 12. Elena, capture the Crystalline Manufacturing Hub in Sector 15. Time estimate? Asked Keiko, already plotting attack vectors. 2 minutes maximum, Sarah replied. Other species are finally mobilizing serious opposition. The Veltharian Alliance just authorized a counteroffensive with unified command structure. Too little, too late, Marcus said, reviewing enemy force dispositions. Their counteroffensive won't launch for another 40 minutes. Standard galactic military doctrine requires extensive preparation phases. The final human assaults demonstrated the full extent of their tactical advantages. While other species had been bred for cooperation and careful planning, humans had evolved for rapid decision-making under extreme pressure. Their ability to process information quickly and act on incomplete data allowed them to maintain offensive momentum when any other species would have paused to consolidate their gains. Keiko's assault on the Zephyrian Industrial Complex exemplified human tactical doctrine, instead of the careful siege warfare that galactic military academies taught. She launched a direct assault on the system's primary defenses, while simultaneously deploying rapid insertion teams to capture key facilities. The bird-like Zephyrians had prepared for a traditional siege lasting weeks or months. They weren't equipped to handle multiple simultaneous attacks that bypassed their prepared defensive positions. David's operation against the Mordesh research station revealed another human advantage: their willingness to accept casualties that other species would consider unacceptable. Galactic military doctrine emphasized force preservation and minimizing losses. Humans, having evolved on a world where survival often required sacrificing individuals for group benefit, approached warfare with a different calculation of acceptable risk. Elena's capture of the Crystalline Manufacturing Hub showcased perhaps the most distinctly human tactical approach: complete disregard for long-term consequences in favor of immediate objectives. She ordered the systematic dismantling of infrastructure that had taken the Jektar decades to grow, stripping away crystalline formations that could never be replaced. From a galactic perspective, it was vandalism. From a wargame perspective, it was brilliantly effective. As the human assaults reached their conclusions, the simulation's AI began processing final victory calculations. The humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic military history: complete strategic dominance in under 1 hour. Professor Veltara watched the final calculations with a mixture of horror and fascination. Economic victory confirmed, she announced to Admiral Zexkar. Human forces control 96% of galactic industrial capacity, 98% of critical resource extraction, and 100% of advanced research facilities. How is this possible? Demanded the Admiral. The simulation was designed to prevent rapid victory. We included safeguards, balance mechanisms, response protocols, all of which assume rational actors following galactic military doctrine, the professor replied. The humans didn't follow any established strategic principles. They pursued objectives using methods that would be considered insane by galactic standards. Around the chamber, other species command teams sat in stunned silence as they watched their carefully planned strategies become irrelevant. The Zephyrians had been preparing a sophisticated diplomatic initiative to create a defensive alliance. The Veltharians had designed an elegant long-term military campaign that would unfold over several years. The Jektar had achieved consensus on a resource-sharing agreement that would have provided sustainable advantages for decades. None of it mattered. The war game was over. At exactly 59 minutes and 43 seconds after the simulation began, the AI announced the final results: economic victory achieved by human Federation forces. Simulation concluded. The silence that followed was profound. 47 different species had spent months preparing for an exercise that would showcase their strategic capabilities over the course of nearly a decade. Instead, they had witnessed a demonstration of warfare so alien to their experience that most couldn't comprehend what had happened. Admiral Zex's car slowly approached the human command station, where 12 young cadets were shutting down their tactical displays and discussing their performance with the casual demeanor of students who had just completed a routine training exercise. "Cadets," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and respect. "I need to understand how you achieved this result. Our most sophisticated strategic analyses indicated that this exercise would require years to complete." Sarah looked up from her final reports. "Years? Why would it take years? Strategic complexity, logistical constraints, diplomatic considerations." The Admiral began, then trailed off as he realized the futility of his explanation. Marcus helped clarify. "Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding about human strategic doctrine. We don't approach warfare the same way other galactic species do." "How do you approach it?" asked Professor Veltara, genuine curiosity overriding her shock. Keiko answered thoughtfully. "We evolved on a world where hesitation meant death. Our entire strategic philosophy is built around rapid decision-making and overwhelming force application. The concept of a decade-long military campaign is foreign to us, but the simulation included numerous safeguards specifically designed to prevent rapid conquest," protested the Admiral. "Safeguards based on galactic military assumptions," David pointed out. "You assumed conquerors would want to hold and develop territory. You assumed attackers would follow standard siege protocols. You assumed commanders would prioritize long-term stability over immediate objectives," Elena added. "Human military history is filled with campaigns that ended faster than anyone thought possible. Blitzkrieg warfare, shock and awe tactics, rapid deployment strategies, speed and aggression are our natural advantages." The Admiral looked around the chamber at the other species' command teams, many of whom were still staring at the tactical displays in disbelief. "This exercise was designed to test strategic patience, long-term planning, and coalition-building capabilities, which are all valuable skills," Sarah agreed diplomatically. "But they're not the only valid approach to military strategy." As word of the humans' victory spread throughout the Academy, it sparked intense debates about warfare, strategy, and the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic military doctrine. Most species had evolved on worlds where cooperation and careful planning provided survival advantages. They had developed military philosophies that emphasized sustainability, coalition building, and long-term strategic thinking. Humans, however, came from a world where rapid adaptation and aggressive responses to threats had determined survival. Their military philosophy prioritized speed, decisive action, and willingness to accept short-term costs for immediate advantages. The simulation had been designed by galactic military experts who assumed their own strategic principles were universal. The discovery that an entire species approached warfare from a completely different philosophical foundation challenged fundamental assumptions about military science. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Military Academy completely restructured their strategic curriculum. The Omega Protocol simulation was redesigned multiple times to account for rapid warfare scenarios. New courses were developed to study human military history and tactical approaches. Most importantly, the galaxy's military leadership began to understand that humanity's admission to the Galactic Federation represented more than just adding another member species. They had encountered a civilization whose very approach to conflict was so radically different that it redefined what was considered possible in military operations. The 12 human cadets who had completed a decade-long wargame in under an hour became legends within the Academy. But more significantly, they had demonstrated that the galaxy's understanding of warfare itself needed to evolve to accommodate new possibilities that their species brought to the stars. The age of patient, methodical galactic warfare had ended before it really began. In its place emerged a new era where the impossible had become routine, and where strategic assumptions that had stood for millennia could be overturned by a group of young humans who simply refused to play by the established rules.